And hello, fabulous AP students. This is Mr. Jacobson. I'm excited to be with you today. Today we're going to talk about AP World History pre-1200. So we're trying to catch you up from what happened in history all the way up to 1200. And we're going to talk mainly about the lenses or the themes of political and interactions with the environment. So let's begin. All right, so here I just kind of give you an idea. So on the left, this over here, this is taken exactly from the framework of the AP curriculum. And what we're going to talk about is theme 3, which is governance. And governance goes into the spice T under political, P political. So political governance, it's all the same. It says a variety of international and external factors contribute to state formation. Something you need to understand is when you think of state, don't think of the state like Texas or California. It's not the kind of state they're necessarily saying. A state can be an empire, it can be a kingdom, it can be a country. It's anything, any entity that has a sovereign government to control it. That's a state. So we're going to talk about state formation, expansion, and decline. Governments maintain order through a variety of administrative institutions. Policies and procedures in governments obtain, retain, and exercise power in different ways and for different purposes. So we're going to go ahead and talk about political and then interactions as well, which is how do things interact with the environment. Here, right here, the environment shapes human societies, and populations grow and change. These populations turn shape in their environment. So let's begin. So first, we're going to talk about political. So what is government? When a group of people live together, naturally someone will emerge as a leader, suggesting to the people how to best allocate or use their resources and surpluses. So basically, somebody is going to eventually stand out of the crowd and say, you know, all this extra grain that we have, I have a great idea for this. Or, hey, you know, I think we need to focus less on growing food and maybe protecting the people. And ideas start coming up and people start supporting other people based on their ideas. And once those people get supported by the majority of the community, then they become a leader and government is formed. So government is something when a person or a group makes decisions for the whole. So we have a couple of government trade centers that pop up before 1200. We have Chang'an over here in China, and here are the many of the empires, I should say dynasties that spring out of it. We have Athens from Greece, where democracy begins. We have Teotihuacan, which is found in Mexico. We have Rome from the Roman Empire, Alexandria, which is a famous city that was named after Alexander the Great when he conquered all of the pretty much Middle East, and then we have the Constantinople, which is going to be a second major city to the Roman Empire when the Roman Empire falls and the Byzantine Empire begins. So with government, you can have urban planning. So urban planning, I mean, comes in many shapes and sizes. One way for urban planning, you get defensive walls, and we see a lot of cities and settlements during this time period before 1200 putting up walls to protect themselves. You see streets and roads that are connecting. In fact, there was a thing, all roads lead to Rome, because Rome had so many roads going throughout its empire. And then we have sewage and water systems, which again are becoming quite popular in the cities. And so all of these things that are being built, all this urban planning, you can't build this unless you have a government of sorts. You can't build it unless you have some kind of a way where you can uh, have the people and have the resources and the capital and money to be able to put together for these massive projects on behalf of the whole, the community. So all the urban planning takes government. So there are two types of governments I want you to think of during this time period of pre 1200. One is called a centralized government. This means that state authority rests in the hands of a powerful bureaucracy in a central location. So whenever you have like a king or an emperor and their power is absolute, that's a centralized government. All the authority rests in one person or one entity. A good example would be the emperors of China. Their word and rule was absolute. The Roman Empire had a centralized government. However, a decentralized government is a form of government with its top level decision making processes dispersed throughout the system rather than concentrated in one person, place, or legislative body. Bottom line, a decentralized government is not a king that has absolute power. And a good example of this would be the Athenian um, Greece, where democracy was born. Because with democracy, then the power doesn't rest with just one person, but the power is dispersed throughout the people as well. For example, in Athens, if they didn't like the leader that they voted in, then when their time is up, they could kick them out. So that's decentralized government, where power is spread among the people and among other entities and not just rested in one person. That is centralized. So government techniques to maintain larger powers. So one of the way governments kind of use to maintain these large empires that are going to emerge in the classical period is you have diplomacy, where instead of fighting to get your way, you use your words. Um, Another way is development of supply lines. With all this empire building that's happening, you gotta feed and have supplies for your armies who are going out conquering all these lands. So you gotta develop these supply lines, and if those supply lines fail, then your armies are going to fail because they're going to starve. They're not going to be equipped properly with what they need to conquer and to divide and continue to grow the empire. Another thing is they started building fortifications and defensive walls and roads. Roads are good because they make it easier for you to transport things, including soldiers, throughout your empire. So if you have roads already cleared, you don't have to try and, take a whole army into a forest where it can be very hard to get through. You have roads, they're clear, it's easy to move all the necessary battering rams and other larger vehicles that they would try to use to siege a city. And then lastly, drawing new groups of military officers and soldiers from local populations and conquered peoples. Rome did a really good job of this. They would conquer an area, but then to help people feel like they belong in that empire, they'd give them rights that they could be protected under the law, and some even were able to work their way up into military officers and fight for Rome and continue to gain more rights within that empire. Another thing that happens in this time period is this idea of divine right to rule. So leaders typically claim divine right to legitimize the rule over the people. For example, the pharaohs of Egypt claimed that they were the son of Ra. This belief usually kept pharaohs in power, despite them being oppressive over the people and even increasing taxes on them. So if people believe that you are connected to divinity, to a god that the people have been worshiping since they've been little, and they believe that that ruler is connected, then it causes them to think twice before rebelling against that leader, even if that leader is a big jerk and he's making their life harder than it should be. So one of the ways this divine right was used is in China, and this is called the mandate of heaven. This is an important thing to understand because Chinese rulers and would-be usurpers are going to use the mandate of heaven to legitimize their rule or legitimize their rebellion, uh, to overthrow the old Chinese emperor to put themselves in as the new one. So the emperor in China is called the Son of Heaven. The people were obligated to follow him as long as he did not become too oppressive. So if the emperor came too oppressive, then you'd have this charismatic, Chinese leader, that would rise up and claim that the mandate of heaven is no longer with the emperor, but the mandate of heaven has fallen on them, and that allows them that legitimizes them to be able to rise up against the current emperor because heaven no longer approves of that emperor, but the person now who's rising up, heaven approves of them, and so they rise up and they go ahead and fight. And with this idea of the mandate of heaven, people aren't going to overthrow the emperor very easily, but also it gave people who were charismatic enough and strategic enough to overthrow the old emperor that way as well. So this idea of the mandate of heaven is going to be used a lot in Chinese history to get people to legitimize the rule, because not just anybody could rule China. You had to be connected to heaven somehow. So this was a way to do it. Okay, another important thing that comes out in pre-1200 is something called law and order. So you have cities that are making laws where the people can be protected. Maybe not all the people, depending on how far back you go. Originally, it was just really the rich people that got protected, but later on, like in the Roman Empire, everybody was protected under the law. So one of the first law codes ever made is this thing right here. This is called the Law Code of Hammurabi. And up here you can see Hammurabi standing, and he's about to get a staff from a god, Shamash. And Shamash is the god of judgment in Mesopotamia or Babylon. So this is Hammurabi's way of saying to the people that the god Shamash gave me the right to make all these laws. And these laws are written from here down to here. If you can see where that line is right there, all the laws are inscribed on this stele or this obelisk, if you will, and it was placed in the center, like in the public center where anybody could come and know what their rights were. And so this is a long time ago. This is about maybe 1700 BCE, right in that area. And this one over here, this is the 12 tables of Rome. And on each of the tables was written the laws, and the laws apply to all Roman citizens, not just the wealthy. And again, this was placed all the way in the forum or the public center of where people would go frequently, um, and so it wasn't something hid up. It wasn't something that was a secret that people didn't know their rights. It was out in the open. Everyone could know. And one of the famous Hammurabi laws is an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth kind of thing, where if a free man punches the tooth out of another free man, then that person will have their tooth punched out as well. So anyway, um, we're gonna go to interactions with the environment now. So this is a pretty simple uh, section here. There's four things I want you to remember of how the environment gets affected under this time period. So one, you have deforestation, where people are just cutting down too many trees. You cut down too many trees, you have a problem if you're not going to grow them back. Timber was the main source of fuel back then. So if you wanted to smelt iron and get it hot, you had to have lots of timber to be able to do that. To do that, you need to cut down trees. And so deforestation happens and it becomes a serious problem during this time period. Another one is desertification, where you're irrigating a bunch of fields too much. And if you irrigate them then and they lose their fertility, then they become desert wastelands. Another one is the soil erosion, where pastoralists go and they overgraze too much with their animals, and this can cause the topsoil to be carried away by the wind, and the topsoil has like most of the nutrients, which again causes a problem because you can't really use that. That ground isn't going to become fertile for a very long time. And then the last one is salinization. This is common as people work the ground more and more. Okay, um, salt deposits can develop if you're not careful. And if salt gets into the soil, then it's going to be harder to grow crops. Like, for example, wheat doesn't grow very well in salt soil. However, barley grows a little bit better. So people start switching from wheat to barley because too much salt was getting intermingled in the soil and was causing a problem, which meant you had less food to be able to support the empire and, of course, your family. So that's it. Go ahead and write your one-page summary, and we'll go ahead and discuss this when we get back. Thanks. Bye-bye.